Hello and welcome. I am the Restless Kaiser.
And I'm Johnny B.
I'm Brush and Quill.
And I am apparently known as Drachinifel.
But together we are...
Modelling for
advantage.
Oh dear, the lag is awful.
Oh, yeah.
Perfect. Nailed it.
On the playback, it's even worse. Right,
Yes.
we're going to have a quick look through the comments. Drachinifel's going to introduce himself in a second. I didn't actually check this beforehand. Drachinifel, is that?
Yes, you have got it correct.
Okay. Alid can't be here. That is a shame. Josh Wood, good evening. Rose is in there fluffing all the boys, getting them ready for the show. Nick from Team Clueless Games. Hello there, buddy. Rosie's paid membership. Why would she do that? She's your
She?
Yeah, Nick, don't tell her don't do that. Rich John, hello.
I haven't even done that.
Check your bank account, Johnny.
Exactly, mate. Maybe she likes some sweet emojis. If you could be a mini, which mini would you be, and which company or person would you want to cast it, and who would paint it? That's a big question. If I was a miniature, what would I be? Today, Matthew, I'd probably be Kaiser Bill. Yeah, let's go with that. And I'd want the Perry twins to do it. There we go. And I'd want John to paint it, which means it'd never come to fruition. John.
I would like to be a generic barbarian, skinny barbarian with beard and ginger hair, which I will paint myself eventually. And yeah, who would I get to? Oh, I don't know. I think I'd have to get the Perrys as well, because the Perrys rock. True fact.
Perry twins rock. Yeah.
And
I would probably be the oldest D&D character I've ever had, which is a twin sword wielding dark elf assassin.
cool day.
I think front rank, because they do some wonderful stuff to paint, and I paint it myself.
Hi, Ashley. Drachinifel, if you could be any miniature.
Well, technically, I guess there's kind of a split answer there, because technically I already am a miniature.
Oh, really?
Yes. Yeah, because one of my hobbies is steampunk, and a little while ago there was Steampunks of Legend, a little modelling line in 32mm
They made
scale.
you a miniature.
Yeah, basically, I was just like, yes, I want to be part of this. Here, have a photo of me in one of my early steampunk outfits. So, nothing to do with me as Drachinifel, as a naval historian or anything like that. That's purely just me. Like, I wanted to be in it, so I was. So I still haven't actually painted my 2 complimentary copies of myself yet. But no, if I had to be anything else, then I would probably actually go with the slightly doolally tech priest that I'm currently playing in Dark Heresy RPG with my friends, where we have somewhat unintentionally munchkined our way into accidentally killing a chaos god.
Oh, the ruinous powers won't like that.
No, the dice were very much in our favor, but I mean, at the end of it, even we were slightly stunned by the outcome.
Wow.
So Commandant says, I would not like to be a mini made of Warlord resin if Johnny B is nearby. You probably don't know, haven't seen that video, because we're a lot smaller than you, Drachinifel. Have you seen our video shot called Warlord resin?
I haven't seen that one. No, I've been catching up on a few of them, but I haven't seen that one.
And what happened? You know the Warlord, is it not Cruel Seas? Their small scale fleet action game, Victory at Sea.
Victory at Sea, yeah.
And they've cast them in this new bendy resin. So we've got a couple of sets to review it. We're there. John's got this ship 4 inches long, USS Portland. He's like, and then just snaps it clean enough on camera. Then he's like, oh, sat directly opposite me. And we just laughed for about 10 minutes at the ridiculousness of this, situation. So that's there's references to don't let John have a ship. That is because he did that. Like, you give a kid a shatterproof ruler, so they just bend it until it breaks. That is exactly what he did when he got his first bit of Warlord resin.
I must admit, the first time someone gave me a ruler that said shatterproof, my first instinct was to bend it 180 degrees to find out if it was true.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert,
absolutely.
it was not.
It's not true. No. Fake news, man. Fake news. Right. In terms of hobby, and then guys, I got myself a big brush because I'm doing something that's achievable whilst also streaming. I'm going to be dry brushing the bases of these trees. New larger trees from Javis.
Larger trees.
Even larger. Because as I go out into the real world and I look at the actual size of real trees, I keep thinking, I need bigger trees. And then I get bigger trees and I think, I still need bigger trees.
Yeah.
Trees are huge,
they're kind of
man.
big, aren't they?
Yeah.
So if you're 12
Have
millimeters.
you decided if you're gonna you decided if you're gonna flock them or keep them as they are straight out the thing?
I'm going to see how they blend with the existing set after we put some clump foliage and stuff on the bases.
Sweet.
What about you, Jay Bizzle? What are you up to tonight?
I'm doing all sorts. I'm painting a random dwarf with a spear. It's me and my mate Loro are playing through Hero Quest, and we're up to Prince Magnus's gold, and his dwarf has got a spear. So I figured I'd model one of those. I've also got some naked dudes. I've nearly finished the first of the crazy Gaelic naked dudes.
Oh, the Skyclad. I'm not sure that's a true thing that ever happened, but we all like the miniatures. Yeah, it's pretty cold in Germany, man. I can't believe they think that.
Cold in Germany. And another menagerie of miniatures on the desk as well there. So that's me. Brush, what are you up to, sir?
I'm painting some Napoleonic French Fusiliers.
Oh, really?
Ooh.
What are they for, Callum?
I don't know. I've got a client. He's a bit bossy, but... No, Kaiser said, would I do him a commission? So I am. So
because
I thought...
For the keen-eyed among you, we might play some sharp practice later this year. Seems like people keep asking for it. Because John's going to have to paint the British.
Am I, though? Callum, you got any free slots, mate?
I said to Kaiser, look, I've always wanted to do a marine landing party. I'll play the British if you want. But
oh, sweet. Well, there you go. I'll have to get around there. And what is
something to do with stairs?
Something to do with stairs? Oh,
yeah.
Yes. He does live on a hill in his castle. Mr. Drachinifel, sir, what wonderful things have you got in front of you?
Well, in front of me, I won't turn it around again, but because I'll probably drop the camera. But I have the entirety of the Battle of Trafalgar in black sails or black seas or whatever it's called.
Black Seas, yeah.
Black Seas miniatures. So yeah, the entirety of the Battle of Trafalgar, both sides. Also, in my immediate vicinity, I have a Dutch 17th century ship of the line, which needs some painting. I have a very large town class cruiser, and that's the old World War I town class, which is about a foot long, which also needs painting. Upstairs, I'm halfway through a Titan Legio. I've got some 54mm Kickstarter models that I also need to do. I tend to be one of these annoying people who runs about 16 different model lines at once when they're painting things.
Are you going to be doing any of that tonight, do you think? Or are we going to see how it goes?
Maybe see how it goes. I mean, my painting and modeling room is mostly based upstairs rather than here. I'm just trying to see if I've got anything in physical reach other than boxes. Oh, I've got some new Dystopian Wars miniatures that have just come through, so I might be able to. I could take those off the sprues while we're going.
Quite the hobby.
That one, which is basically it. I don't know if you've been following the Dystopian Wars. Yeah,
would call a ship after a land battle.
Oh, the Russians did it about 4 times. But the that one is basically the Russian half of the starter set from War Cradle's re-release, and then you've got this one, which is a new one that I've been sent to preview, review, etc., which is a
named after an airport.
Yes, because it's got an aircraft carrier in it.
Right, okay, yeah.
So that's going on. So yeah, at some point I've got to open that up and check what the sprues are like.
Get some working on that.
So coming down to ask, interestingly, these trees are only £2.50 each because they're from Javis Scenics. They don't come. We've put them on the Warlord 60mm bases. You come with a little plug. John picked one up for test purposes from where was it, John? Little hobby place.
It's a little place called the Hobby Box, I think, and it's local to us. So Barton, Leclay, which is just down the A6 from us. It's a proper old school little. It's a little dude there with his. He's got kits coming off of the wall everywhere.
Stuff that you haven't seen, you know, like Ukrainian model kits and so forth.
Have a good old rummage.
But they're from Javis, and they're surprisingly cheap. I mean, they're not fantastic, but they're a big step up. If you've got yourself, you know, a £10 bag of China trees, these are definitely next step, and they're a lot bigger. This is probably 8 inches, I think, or thereabouts.
Anyways, shut up!
Yeah.
Damn it! It's the time of the stream where I'm going to ask the man a question, and that is, who's your daddy, and what does he do? And with that comment there, the Kaiser is going to stop with his brush, and he's going to put your head on the main screen, and then you're going to tell us about you and your channel. There we go. Do it.
Do it now!
Come on, we're here.
Oh, right. Hello. Yes, apparently I am now on the screen completely. So yes, I am. I'm Drachinifel. I spend most of my day researching and then writing scripts for, and then producing the videos that go on my YouTube channel, which, usefully enough, is also called Drachinifel. So yes, naval history, mostly covering roughly 1850 to 1950. I generally refuse to go any more modern than 1950, but I will go back past 1850 quite happily, as long as I can find the relevant level of detail and material that's reliable.
Okie dokie.
Okay.
That's where we're going to find you.
So we're going to find you.
Kaiser, take it away.
So, because Drachinifel is like a YouTube legend, by the way, it's like 250,000 subscribers, something like that.
Yeah, just over now. They seem to keep on coming.
Yeah. So presumably you don't like have to have a real job or anything anymore. You just like read books about tall sailors and make videos.
I did have a day job up until earlier this year, but actually, well, considering we are all vaguely in the British Isles, I think you might have a slightly better understanding of it than most of my general audience. I used to work for Croydon Council.
Croydon,
Oh.
And I believe it or not, I made it through 3.5 years without getting stabbed, which I thought was quite impressive.
I think it's only the police that get stabbed in Croydon, mate, isn't it?
Oh no, they're equal opportunities. Croydon is the only place where I've gone out of an evening, accidentally booked tickets to the wrong cinema, ended up in the cinema in Croydon High Street rather than the one in the Croydon Industrial Estate, which is paradoxically safer. And stepped out of the high street cinema and stepped over no less than 3 different people who were in varying stages of unconsciousness and or bleeding out, depending on what you wanted to judge the colours of the fluids that were leaking out of them were.
Wow.
And no one paying much attention to it all, apart from, I think, one guy who had the paramedics and the police around him.
That's not what you need after a Pixar movie, is it? Do you know what I mean?
No, not really. But yeah, as well, anyone who bothers to follow that aspect of the news will have known. It's probably coming up, pushing September, October last year. Croydon announced that they were basically bankrupt, however you want to put it, because they'd managed to rack up a debt about the size of a small third world country's GDP.
Oh.
And
so they had to make a few cuts.
yeah, especially considering in their infinite wisdom, apart from kicking out the CEO, most of the rest of the solution appeared to be get the people who have caused the problem to try and fix the problem. Spoiler alert, they did not fix the problem.
They're very much the wrong people, aren't they?
Yes. So I decided basically at that point the channel was getting enough to keep the lights on. So I decided, well, I actually hate office politics and I hate real politics even more than I hate office politics. So I'm not going back.
Yes.
Good choice there.
Look, I set out, identified a few questions that we might have, some topics that we might want to discover. So I'm going to just catch up with the chat. And then we'll talk a little bit about Jutland, I think. Did I spot a Star Trek ship just behind you, says Rosie Raccoon?
Yes, you did. You, in fact, spotted several. There's NX-01 in its refit configuration. We never got to see in any of the series.
It's been a long road!
Then we've got the Gold Enterprise D and the Gold Enterprise NCC 1701. They
I'm
hide
surprised she
behind my
didn't
eyes.
spot the dinosaurs over the.
Oh, the
over the
dinosaurs up there.
top one.
I also
There's
have, if I can do this.
there's a couple of Stargates behind it as well, isn't there?
Yeah, Atlantis Stargate and original SG-1 Flavor Stargate and a Corellian Corvette.
Oh, we've got
and
all the models.
All the
And,
sci-fi, mate.
yeah, and a Lego spaceship I built years and years and years ago.
So if you get hard up, you could just rent that room out as a museum.
Oh yeah, there's my Enterprise rack ahead of me over the screen, which is all the Eagle Moss Enterprises from the Enterprise era up to Enterprise J in large and small scale, so that's quite fun. And I also have this, which I don't know if any of you have ever played Star Trek Online.
Yes.
So this is my custom built Tier 6 Federation Explorer dash battle cruiser dash whatever, made up of the Tier 6 Odyssey expansion pack. So this one is the USS Audacious. It's my personal ship.
I played Star Trek Online for a long time before I had children though, and things to do.
Fair enough.
Yeah, loved it. Friends General Haig, I always wondered if naked fanatics were attacked in their camp at night, would they have to stop to take off their PJs before they could defend themselves? A fair question.
It's a true fact. They did have to do that.
Just down the road. I work in Tulsa Hill, mate. I'm literally down the road. I did training in Croydon some years ago. Fun place.
Well, that's one way of describing it.
Yeah. Sunk all the money into a half-built mega mall. Is that a thing?
Yes. Yeah. Although it does contain a surprisingly decent Pizza Hut.
Ooh. Right. So the question I was going to start with then is, Drac, is who won the Battle of Jutland? Well, start from a position of assuming these guys don't even know that Jutland was a battle, and we'll be good. You just talk away, mate.
Okay, so the Battle of Jutland is the single largest naval battle of World War One. It remains actually the single largest direct confrontation of warships in history. There were one or two battles in the Second World War that technically involved more ships, but not in
craft and stuff, right?
Yeah, not in direct combat, and the actions were usually spread out over several engagements. Also, the biggest clash of battleships. It's the biggest of many things when it comes to naval warfare, including some of the biggest colossal mess ups when it comes to certain commanders. You
mean Vice Admiral Sir David Beatty?
Yes, I do.
And he wears his hat at a jaunty angle, so you know he's legit.
Yeah, I think it was constricting the blood flow to his brain. But no, it was basically, it started out as a German attempt to lure out part of the British fleet, which was much bigger than it was, and destroy it. That didn't go so well for them because, as it turned out, the entire British fleet showed up because the British, thanks to signal code breaking, knew that they were coming. And you end up with a slightly paradoxical situation of the entire British fleet sortying to intercept the Germans before the Germans had actually set out to sortie on their own mission, which they were the planners of. It just worked out that way because, the British had further to go. So you ended up with effectively, as I call it, two battles within Jutland. You had the clash of the battle cruisers first, which was Admiral Beatty versus Admiral Hipper, and Beatty basically lost that battle. Pretty much the only thing that you could say that Beatty succeeded in doing was that he did manage to lure the German battle cruisers and the rest of the German battle fleet to the British fleet, but he managed to do it in the single worst possible way imaginable.
By losing several of his ships.
Yeah, he got two of his battle cruisers blown up, a bunch of them very badly damaged, and almost managed to lose the single most powerful battle squadron in the world when he, through the second or third display of poor signaling that day, sent 5th Battle Squadron with the Queen Elizabeth-class battleships sailing into the entire German fleet. And they were tough, but 4 ships versus several dozen is not really fair. It was only thanks to the fact that they were so ridiculously tough that they survived. But so that was the kind of the end of round 1, if you like. The Germans had come away with some damage, but the British had lost two big capital ships and a lot of others badly beaten up. And then you kind of have round 2, which is when Jellicoe, leading the Grand Fleet, the main bulk of the Royal Navy, arrives. And from that point on, you can If you imagine the Monty Python skit where everybody sees the killer rabbit and just goes, "Run away!" That's basically the Germans for the entire rest of the day.
If I can set the scene for you here a little bit for people that are not at all familiar with the setting. So Drachinifel's just outlined. You've got the two massive battle fleets composed of 30-ish battleships, just in broad numbers. But they've got a subcomponent in each case of what's called battle cruisers. So these are faster. They have battleship size armament, so 11, 12, 13 and a half inch guns. But they have more like cruiser armor, so that they sacrifice armor for speed.
Yeah,
and these
to varying
are
degrees depending on the design.
Yeah, and you've done a video recently about cruiser killers and all that kind of thing, haven't you? And so these two subcomponents of the battle fleets have had a fight, and the German Navy believes it's got the better of the British insofar as it's managed to separate off this battle cruiser squadron, and it thinks it's going to annihilate it because they can't really believe that this battle cruiser squadron is coming at them rather than running away. So this is exactly what we've been trying to do for 2 years, is to be able to take a little bit of the Royal Navy, crush it, and come out tomorrow where the numbers are more even, because they've got a decided disadvantage. And so they're having this, they're chasing down this battlecruiser squadron, which includes a squadron of the most powerful battleships, the fast battleships, which track men. But the Germans really feel that they've got, this is their target, this is the moment. And then what they don't know is that Jellicoe, with the actual rest of the Grand Fleet, has been coming, and he's just a matter of a few hours away with all of this. And suddenly, out of the mist, the whole Grand Fleet is in a half moon crescent facing towards the German ships rushing towards them. And they're like, oh shit, we've been baited into a trap. You know, they go from that. You want to watch, you love to see the camera and the moment that Franz von Hippel realizes, I think I've got them, to shit, they're going to annihilate us all in the next half an hour. And they had a really powerful example of this, because in the Russo-Japanese War, the Battle of Tsushima, that's exactly what happened to, I can't even pronounce the guy's name, the Russian, an ill fortune, but a Russian battle squadron had done exactly that, sailed in its inner line head on towards a battle fleet deployed, waiting for it, and it led to its annihilation. You know, so that's this moment that Drachinifel's just, the Germans are just experiencing that shit, they've got us.
Yeah, and then Scheer turns around. And all credit to him, Scheer is an excellent admiral. He's just dealt an incredibly bad hand. So he organizes it. He tells his fleet to do what's called in German, as they do love their long words, some incredibly long description that basically amounts to battle turn away. And that's actually quite an impressive feat, because all of these different ships are different classes, different turning rates, different actual overall speeds. So he coordinates them through a practice maneuver where, instead of the traditional naval tactic, which is one ship turns and then the next ship follows that and the next ship follows that, so they all keep the sort of conga line round, he realizes that's not going to work, because that means there's going to be this fixed turning point, and all the British have to do is focus all their guns on that turning point, and they can just knock them off one after the other. So instead they do this battle turn away where everybody does a simultaneous 180. So it reverses the line.
All do this at the same time.
Yeah, and it reverses the line so they can sail away pretty darn quickly. Which I say, because all the ships have these different turning rates and everything, is actually a really impressive bit of seamanship to pull off. But it does let him slip away into the mist, because it's quite misty on that day. The visibility is not great. The hilarious part about it is that then Jellicoe thinks, right, well, let's head on south and see if we can find them again. As it turns out, Jellicoe's basically going south, maybe with a fraction of southeast. Hipper and Scheer are heading mostly southwest, so they're actually on diverging courses. But the Germans don't know this. They think the British are on their tails. So Scheer decides he's going to break hard to the east to try and throw off pursuit, which paradoxically ends up leading him straight into Jellicoe's guns again. So he has to do another battle turn away, but because the first one caused damage, and by this point Jellicoe's tightened up his formation, because his turning into this crossing the T formation was very last minute, because BT wasn't telling him what was going on. And Shear realizes in this second event that even his battle turnaway isn't going to save the most modern part of his fleet because they're really getting badly hit, and so he has to throw the German battle cruisers in as a distraction, basically, to allow the rest of his fleet time to turn and get away, which they do manage to do. The German battle cruisers,
this idea called the Totenritt, the death ride, as part of German military culture. Really, it exists on land and at sea, and in the idea that there is some glory in that. I am going to make a sacrificial charge now, and so the German battle cruisers turn into the whole Grand Fleet at this point, expecting to die, so that the rest of the fleet can escape.
And the only reason they don't die is the British actually have too many ships, because what happens is that everybody, as everyone was expecting, absolutely every British ship in range opens fire, but because there's no particular way of telling, well, this particular column of water from a shell exploding belongs to this ship, you end up with an awful lot of water columns, and no one can quite tell which one was theirs. So the way that at that point that they're adjusting for fire is you fire a salvo, you see where it lands, you go, oh, okay, adjust 400 yards up, 3 degrees right, fire again. But now there's just this forest of water columns, and everyone's thinking, well, I'm vaguely in the right area, but I have no idea which way I should be correcting. So let's try some randomized correction and see what happens. And as a result, the accuracy of the British guns overall is pretty low during that phase. But there's just so many shells. The German battle cruisers still get quite badly worked over, just not quite badly enough to sink them. The ironic part being that if Jellicoe had perhaps said to maybe 2 of his battle squadrons, right, you engage, then he probably actually would have got more accuracy out of it. But to be honest, when you see half a dozen enemy ships charging at you headlong, you can't really fault anyone for just shooting.
Indeed. So this this death ride happens. The German fleet again manages to disengage, gets lost in the mist. There's horrendous damage to the German battlecruiser squadron. One of them is listing and doesn't actually make it home. Is that Seydlitz? I can't remember.
No, well, Seydlitz makes it home, but also sinks. It's basically it goes beyond the ability of its pumps to keep up with the flooding around about the time it's getting to the Jade Estuary. Then a couple of tugs show up and lend their aid to fighting the progressive flooding, and they just about manage to edge it into port after it having gone aground a couple of times because its draft has increased so much. And literally the minute that they leave it alone at the dock side, it just sinks to the bottom. It just happens to be it's in the dock, so that's not very far. So it looks like
I've got that bit from the start of Pirates of the Caribbean in my head.
Yes, that's pretty much Seydlitz, except on a grand scale. The one that doesn't make it back is Lutzow, and it's basically the survival and loss of those 2 battle cruisers is down to exactly the same component of the ship, because capital ships at this point are all built with underwater torpedo tubes, just in case they get close enough to torpedo an enemy ship.
Yeah, which happens exactly 0 times in history, or maybe once.
Once possibly when Rodney hits Bismarck with a torpedo in the Second World War.
Is the only time that's a battleship's fired a torpedo.
And hit something. But basically, because obviously torpedoes are very large weapons, they're sort of 12, 18 foot long, depending on the model, and there's multiple of them, and all the machinery to maneuver them into the tubes to fire them. The torpedo rooms on these capital ships are quite large, especially because they tend to have them paired. So you have a port and starboard launcher in the same section of the ship. And in Lutzow's case, a shell manages to breach the torpedo room, so this massive volume in the bow of the ship floods, and that acts as a gigantic anchor, which effectively once that's
so heavily.
At that point, once it floods, you're never really going to save the ship, because it's just going to pull the ship down to a point where water can come into all sorts of other bits and pieces like portholes and scuttles and other shell holes that were higher on the ship that didn't matter before. So it goes down, and Seydlitz, everything in the bow is flooded, except the torpedo room, so which acts as kind of it's a little
There's a big air pocket in there.
Yeah, it's almost like holding on to a little life preserver as it meanders its way forward.
Right. I mean, it's interesting that kind of stuff. How there's still a lot we don't know, of course, because when you have these catastrophic detonations like you get on Invincible and so forth, you get these magazine hits. There's nobody left to provide an accurate account of what literally happened. They send divers down to these things and try, but we cannot definitively say what caused the loss of these ships.
Yeah,
nobody could record it.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, if you've got several hundred tons of cordite going off next to you, one, you're almost certainly not making it out, and two, you've probably got other things to worry about. Bizarrely enough, there is one guy who does make it out of Invincible's turret, the one that actually explodes. If you've seen probably most people have seen the picture of Invincible all aflame in the process of exploding at Jutland. And in the middle of that fireball, believe it or not, is one guy in that turret that's in the middle of that massive explosion, and he makes it out.
Yeah.
He just there's a huge flare up of fire, and then the next thing he knows, like, water. I guess I'm getting out then. As the rest of the ship goes down. Yeah, he got picked up. He gave his account, but he couldn't really give much more of his account than I was poking my head out of the turret, and then there was a colossal ball of flame, and then I was in the water, which doesn't help. I mean, I
was wondering, because I know that some of the survivors from Titanic, they got awful abuse when they survived, and if you're the sole survivor of this one ship,
there were very, very few. I think there's like a handful
that's what I was asking.
Of survivors. Yeah, there's a handful of survivors from Invincible, some from Queen Mary. I think Indefatigable goes down with all hands. Certainly Defense does, one of the armored cruisers. But there's very few survivors. But to be honest, most of those who make it out, everyone's just like, well, we're just glad you made it out, to be perfectly honest.
Can you see that?
Yeah.
Oh my.
So yes, somewhere where you see this central burst of flame, and you've got that little black pillar of smoke coming out as well. Somewhere just to the left of that pillar of smoke, about on the level of the top of the pillar of smoke, is the guy who will actually survive all of that somehow. But yeah, that's
this is so what's quite striking and catastrophic about these things though is in the age of sail, ships fired round shot at one another. They dismounted most of the cannon, and the ship was in tatters, surrenders, and still survives the battle to be taken as a prize. Things just didn't explode. Whereas Invincible is what, 15,000 tons, something like that. It's
even bigger. It's about 18,000.
18,000 tons, a crew of over 1,000 people. How long?
It's hundreds of feet. I think it's about 600 feet.
Enormous weapon, takes a couple of shells, the size of shell that it fires itself, and just explodes. It's like a moment from a cartoon where somebody fires a something, and then just this inexplicably vast explosion happens. Because these things, the magazines on these things are absolutely enormous. The amount of explosive power.
Hundreds of tons of cordite. And you've got to bear in mind, I mean, Invincible's not the biggest ship present on the day, but if you think back to something like, if you think back to the Battle of Jutland, if anyone's been to Portsmouth, seen HMS Victory. So Invincible outmasses Victory by a factor of between 4 and 5 times. So it's a seriously large vessel. And it just goes pop like that. I mean, in the age of sail, as you say, that occasionally fire would reach to the magazine of a ship and it would explode. But it was such a shocking event when it happened that quite often a battle you could have a full-fledged battle and it would stop.
Well, that happened in the Battle of the Nine now when the French flagship blows up. Everyone's just stunned by what's happened.
Yeah, and trying to rescue survivors and wondering what on earth has just gone on. And that's a few tens of tons of gunpowder, if you're lucky. Whereas, say, this is, cordite is more energetic in the first place, and there's a lot more of it. And by the time Invincible goes up, there's already been several ships that have gone up like this, and apart from kind of looking at it and going, that was impressive, no one really stops to consider anything.
But no one imagined that this was what people expected. These ships would slug it out for a long period of time and be destroyed. I mean, I read an article some years ago saying, you know, how many dreadnought battleships were sunk by naval gunfire. And if you remove flashback from magazine hits or whatever, I think the answer is 0. They don't actually have the firepower to obliterate one another.
Yeah, well, I mean, it when it comes to battleships and battle cruisers, when they die, you basically have one of 3 forms of death. You either have the instant death, like this, when something really catastrophic goes horribly wrong. You have the relatively quick death by conventional gunfire, but even then, because they're so big, even a relatively quick death is a matter of several hours. So you can have something like Bismarck lasts a couple of hours. Kirishima at the Night Battle of Guadalcanal lasts actually longer than Bismarck, about 3 hours, even though it's less well built and is hit by very heavy shells. And that is when you've just got uncontrollable fires, uncontrollable leaks, but 30,000 or more tons of ship, it takes a while to get enough water leaking in without a catastrophic explosion to actually pull the ship down. And then the last form is the very slow lingering death by naval gunfire, and that's when you have something like Lutzow at the Battle of Jutland, where you inflict enough damage that it's not really recoverable. But again, because of the sheer size of it, the amount of water that's coming in takes time to build up to fatal proportions. And those are the ones where it's a little bit of an edge case, because sometimes, because the water's only coming in at a certain rate, you can make a case that maybe it could be saved. But it being saved would require very specific circumstances, usually involving the ship not moving and you getting plenty of ships there to assist it ASAP. And obviously, the enemy has a vote in a battle. That's not really going to happen a lot of the time.
The enemy gets votes.
I mean, it's the same thing in World War II with USS Hornet. Technically speaking, you might have actually been able to save Hornet even after the second Japanese attack.
The one the Japanese find in the middle of the night, abandoned, and consider sending a prize crew aboard.
Yeah.
It's an aircraft carrier the Americans think is burnt out, and the Americans were really quite good at damage control. They were very good at preserving ships that other people would have given up on. But they've abandoned this carrier. The Japanese find it in the middle of the night and think, well, maybe we could fix this, tow it away. But in the end, they torpedo it, didn't they?
Yeah, they torpedo it. They fire hundreds of shells into it, and it still won't go down quickly. And then the Japanese find it several hours later and wonder what's going on. But it's just that side of fatally damaged that they think it's not worth actually sending someone aboard to try and take it over, and they end up using their torpedoes, which work a lot better, to finally send it to the bottom. But yeah, if it hadn't been for the fact that Japanese surface forces were advancing on the Americans overnight, then they might just have been able to salvage Hornet.
But I was going back to what Kaiser was saying about the difference between Napoleonic and modern, World War II ships. Sort of looking at what you've been saying, the like with land battles, the better technology, meaning you could shoot from further away, switched the aim of what you were trying to do. You know, like Napoleonic shipboard combat was very much about capture the ship, get your prize money, sail it back, add it to your navy.
Yeah.
Whereas, like later, like with longer range guns, and certainly the advent of aircraft carriers, it was get rid of them before they even cross the horizon.
Yes.
I don't even want to see them.
Yeah, it's basically the increasing power of weaponry, because a Napoleonic ship, you've got a cannonball, maybe right towards the very end, the beginning, you experiment with shells, but it's mostly cannonballs. You shoot a cannonball through a ship, you've poked a cannonball-sized hole in the ship. If you shoot a lot of cannonballs, there's a lot of cannonball-sized holes in the ship, and maybe a few bigger bits where you've managed to blast apart enough pieces to knock out a large section. But and fundamentally,
not a lot of space on the gun deck that isn't dudes or cannons. So, I mean, that cannonball does do something.
Yeah, but fundamentally, it takes an awful lot to damage or hull a wooden warship enough for it to be in danger of sinking. And if a cannonball stops inside your ship, about the worst risk is it's still hot from the cannon. It might set you on fire. But that's it. If someone's brave and has a good pair of oven gloves or something, they're worried about that, they can just chuck it over the side. Whereas once you get armor in the middle of the 19th century, then you require more powerful guns, bigger guns. They start putting explosive payloads in them again after shells kind of have a little bit of a death with the initial advent of armor. And you get to the point by World War I or World War II where the force of the weapon, both in terms of kinetic energy and explosive power, that's needed just to breach the protection of the enemy vessel to do some damage to knock it out, also happens to carry the power to completely wreck that vessel and send it to the bottom if necessary. The other thing as well is with advancing technology, it becomes a lot harder to operate vessels that from different sides, because in the Napoleonic era, if you board an French or Spanish or whatever, or occasionally a British vessel and capture it and bring it into your navy, sails are sails, pulleys are pulleys, ropes are ropes. Everyone knows how to work these. There might be some very minor variations, but nothing a crew can't adapt to in a few days. You get used to the performance of the ship. The wooden hull is a wooden hull. Again, slight differences, but everyone can understand it. Whereas by World War I, if you're talking British versus German, one side's building in metric, one side's building in imperial, so the ammunition won't necessarily fit. You're not going to replace the guns, because if you replace all the guns, you've got to replace the shell hoist, the magazines. You basically might as well build a new ship. All the engines are going to be built by different people. They're going to need different spare parts. All the instructions and the operational labels, like don't touch this, do touch this, do this first before you do this. One's going to be in German, one's going to be in English. It's even if you somehow manage to capture a vessel without having blown it into mostly smithereens, the chances of you being able to efficiently incorporate it into your own navy are slim to none.
Yeah. And it's easy to, or it's difficult to comprehend, especially in Britain. We don't have a dreadnought to look at. I don't think anywhere in Europe is there. I know there's the Texas in America. But we don't actually have a ship of anything like that size. But for people who not more familiar with land warfare, if you think about Second World War field artillery, is at biggest cannon you're likely to see anywhere near a war games table is 150 mil, and that'd be a really big one for a war games table. That's 6 inches. That is a baby gun by naval standards. Yeah,
if you think about like a KV-2 tank, you might find
that 3-inch gun.
Yeah. The KV-2 tank on the battlefield in a war game might be a fairly major item, unless you're playing something on a really, really large scale. It's a short barrel weapon, so on a naval vessel they wouldn't even bother putting that on because it's too short range. And the reason it's a short barrel weapon on a KV-2 is because they needed to make it lighter so that they could get it on the tank.
Yeah.
Whereas on a ship, you want a long barrel weapon, which is going to be considerably heavier. I mean, one of the best ways actually to get an idea of it is if you ever go down to Bovington Tank Museum. At one of the two entrances, they have a British prototype tank destroyer from the early Cold War period, which I think, if I remember correctly, it's a Centurion chassis. It might be a Conqueror chassis, but one of the two, one of those early tanks. And it's got the world's biggest box turret on it. It looks like a small building that's been stuck on top of a tank.
To be able to accommodate this naval gun.
Yeah, and it's got this monstrous gun, and you're looking at it going, wow. And you can look actually across from where that one is at one of the gates. You can actually look across to the army facilities where they've got a Challenger 1 or 2 on display. And you think, hang on a minute, that gun is considerably larger than the gun that's on the modern tank. Obviously, the modern one has a bit more velocity to it and everything, but that massive tank destroyer gun is maybe a secondary battery gun on a battleship. And if it is, the battleship will be carrying 24 of them. And actually, most battleships would be carrying secondary batteries that are bigger than that. Yeah. And that's before you get to the main guns, which are vastly larger still.
I mean, they're just obscene. Battleships, and it's why we don't have them, right? There aren't any battleships you have no use for a war machine that's that expensive, that's basically a slug thrower.
Yeah, the fundamental reason that battleships died wasn't necessarily that they were vulnerable to damage, because, to be honest, anything you can throw at a battleship can kill a carrier 3 times over, because carriers are even more vulnerable. The reason the battleship died is because the guns could only shoot out to about 20 or so miles, which means your radius of action is that, or your radius of control and effect is that 20-mile radius. A carrier with aircraft that can go 400, 500, 600 miles, it can just hit things much further away. And this is what you see in World War II with sinking of Yamato, sinking of Musashi, all sorts of things. It's like, if Yamato was right up next to the American carrier fleet, Yamato would win. But the American carrier fleet can hit it a day's sailing away from where they are.
Which is exactly what happens, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. We were talking about Jutland now, because we had the question, and I kind of come to realize, I don't know what kind of context a lot of the viewers have. So Jutland, we got through the first phase of it. There's then some action during the night in which some other ships are lost.
Yes.
But Jutland remains controversial today over precisely who won the battle, because you have 2 rival arguments. One is the kind of operational, tactical. The British lost more sailors, the British lost more heavy warships. And then you have a counter argument, which was made at the time, which was that the German Navy has assaulted its jailer, but it is still in jail. So where do you stand on those kind of arguments?
Well, I think you kind of almost have to look at it at 3 levels. And I split one of them into 2. So on the I call the tactical level. So the tactical level is like your score sheet at the end of the day: who's lost the most ships, who's lost the most men. Yeah. You can make an argument that the Germans have won that because their score sheet is higher in terms of ships destroyed. But what I tend to do is split it into 2, because there are effectively 2 actions, as we discussed. There's the battle cruiser action, and then there's the battleship action. Almost all the German kills come in the battle cruiser action. Almost all the British kills come during the battleship action. And so when you actually add up who was badly damaged and who was lost in those 2 actions, it actually becomes fairly clear that the battle cruiser action is a definitive German victory. The battleship action is a definitive British victory. And because the battleship action is the much larger and much more vital action, it actually, although they've lost more ships, it actually paradoxically adds up to a British victory overall. The next level is kind of what I call between an intermediate level between tactical and strategic, which is what's the state of the fleets the day after. Yes. Within 24 hours of that battle, because the British have got battleships that were still in dock, still in refit, still completing, they're able to sail their battle fleet 24 hours after the battle at pretty much the same strength they had going into the battle. The battle cruiser fleet is somewhat reduced, but they still have a number of them. And Jellicoe's attitude a day after the battle is, we're ready to go again. Our overall strength has barely been diminished. Scheer, 24 hours later, is looking at half his battle fleet that survived being in 6-8 months of repair. They're not going anywhere. The German battle cruiser forces ceased to exist as a combat viable unit, even though all but one of them has survived. They're so badly beaten up. And Scheer's first attitude after the battle is, let's never do that again. Because we will die horribly. Really close. Yeah. He knows how close they came to dying so horribly, and he does not want to run that risk again. So on that kind of intermediate level, it's definitely a British victory, because they're ready for round 2. It's only mildly diminished. The Germans don't want to fight, and they only have about half their ships left capable of action. And then on the largest scale of what did both sides actually accomplish, in a way, it was Britain's battle to lose, because going into Jutland, Britain had command of the seas, it had the bigger fleet, and it had the ability to control world trade. As long as they didn't lose Jutland decisively, they would still retain that, and that's what they needed. The Germans, conversely, were slowly strangling under that blockade of their trade, and they needed to either break the British fleet, or at the very least reduce the British fleet down to a point where they could then take on and destroy the rest of the fleet. Neither of those objectives were achieved, and this is why you get that whole has assaulted their jailer but is still in jail. The German fleet fundamentally has not changed the balance of power in the North Sea, except to their own detriment by the end of the Battle of Jutland. So on that much larger scale, it's still a British victory, albeit, as I say, that even a draw on all the other levels would still have been a British victory. So overall, you kind of end up with two definite British victories, and then a kind of we won the bigger part of the two tactical engagements. So overall, I say it's a British victory, but that doesn't diminish the fact that BT got very badly beaten by Hipper.
So what ends up being really interesting about this, though, as the outcome of the battle, is you have in Britain, people are disgusted by the outcome of this battle. They are expecting a second Trafalgar. They have invested 2% of GDP for the past 20 years on building warships. There's been big public campaigns. We want 8 and we won't wait. You know, there's been a major investment of national prestige, morale, and treasure and time has gone into building this battle fleet. They've got the best fleet in the world, the ablest commanders allegedly, and they come back arguably not having won. And people are expecting this annihilation battle, which would decide the outcome of the war in one afternoon. And Kitchener said Jellicoe was the admiral of the Grand Fleet, was the only man who could lose the war in an afternoon.
That was definitely said of Jellicoe. No. But part of what doesn't help, to be honest, is the a combination of the distances involved. Because remember, I said the British sailed first. They've got a lot further to go to the battle, and the battle results in this chase of the Germans south. So they have a very much longer distance to go to get home. Because the Germans are the ones who are running back home in the first place. So because the Germans get home first, and because they have obviously these very spectacular explosions, they get
to put the first bit of news out.
Yeah, they get this first hit in on who's won. The other thing is the British elements of the British fleet stay around the battlefield for several days afterwards, looking for survivors, trying to work out if there's any ships that are not lost as in sunk, but lost as in, have physically gotten lost and might need some help. And between all of that, by the time the Admiralty has collated, okay, you've got home, we're still waiting for him, and it's taken them several days to all get back anyway, apart from the ones who are still out there. By this point, the Germans are already on their PR offensive, so they get the first, second, and third shots in the PR war, and it's only almost a week later that the Admiralty has any kind of clear idea about what might have actually happened, even in terms of their own losses. And then they've got to try and piece together, okay, what do we think the Germans lost? But as that narrative starts to build up, they're kind of playing catch up to the Germans. And it kind of it fizzles out a little bit towards the end of 1916, because you get the Battle of the Somme, which is obviously a rather large distraction in the media. And also the Germans go a little bit overboard. Most of their claims of how many ships they've killed is roughly accurate. They're slightly overly generous to themselves, but not tremendously.
They're not major warships, for example.
No, but what really gets them is that they don't admit to the loss or the bad damage to a number of their ships. Like, they don't want to admit Lutzow's been sunk, for instance. And so when the British Admiralty starts releasing their figures and say, yes, we've definitely lost these ships, but we haven't lost these ones that the Germans are claiming we've lost. And then they turn around and say, well, we think we sunk this, this, and this. And some of the Admiralty claims are wildly over-optimistic for various reasons. But people are looking at them going, are you sure you sunk that many? But then the Admiralty is able to pick up on certain ones, like they're able to prove definitively that Lutzow has sunk. The Germans have been denying Lutzow has been sunk, and eventually they're forced to admit, actually, yes, Lutzow has been sunk. And then everyone's sitting there going, oh, hang on, if they lied about that, what else did they lie about? And the narrative starts to switch more towards the British, even though, as I say, they're actually even more wildly optimistic than the Germans are in terms of what's actually been lost. But
the bit that I find... So the whole aftermath of it, the Royal Navy's ability to learn in the First World War. So I'm big on modern history. In modern history, we look again at the traditional narrative and say, hang on, hang on, that just because that's what was said or believed at the time, we need to be much more critical. We've got new information. And I'm not a believer that the British Army was a set of butchers and bunglers. I think they were very, very technically sophisticated and always looking for new ideas. That doesn't make the loss of life any more acceptable, but it was much more innovative than they're ever given credit for. What I find really interesting about the Navy is it seems to be much less so. And I think of the two specific examples from earlier on in the war. One is Trowbridge in the Goeben and the Breslau incident. It's like they court-martialed this guy for not attacking a warship, which was clearly going to crush him. But Vice Admiral Sir David Beatty at Jutland, he's the guy who led this battle cruiser squadron to near destruction. He fails to communicate effectively with Jellicoe because he doesn't like to use radios. They're newfangled. I know these are oversimplifying it, but the gunnery is laggardly on his squadrons, and they're among the most powerful squadrons in the Navy. These squadrons perform really badly, and he becomes Admiral of the Fleet. How did you get promoted? You're the guy who screwed up in the major naval battle, surely. But it seems to just slip off him.
Yeah, he has a little bit of a sort of kind of a Teflon coating to him. But the other thing you've got to bear in mind is that because the picture initially of Jutland is so confused for the Admiralty, they're spending a fair bit of time trying to figure out exactly what's happened and why. And even when it comes down to the ships that have exploded, they're still trying to figure out why those ships have exploded. Was it a flaw? Basically, they're trying to figure out, was it a flaw in the design? Was it a flaw in procedure? Was it some German superweapon? And
German superweapon, that's probably it.
Yeah. And whilst all of this is going on internally, Beatty, the one thing he's very good at is politics. He has a lot of political connections, a lot of friends in high places, and the way that command turns over is that after a certain amount of time, everyone is supposed to be promoted unless you can have a good reason why not. And
I mean, look at him.
Yeah,
he looks well shifty.
Jellicoe ends up getting promoted to First Sea Lord, which is kind of the top job in the Royal Navy officially.
Yeah,
whereas
that's Jellicoe, look.
Yeah. And so that leaves the position of commander of the Grand Fleet open, and Beatty is the next most, well, theoretically the next most senior admiral with recent battle experience. Bearing in mind at this point they still haven't concluded exactly why things have gone wrong. And between that and his friends, he manages to get himself appointed to commander of the Grand Fleet. And he stays there for, well, after he takes command till after the end of the war. The one thing you can say from him, he is a very good political operator, which actually stands the Royal Navy in fairly good stead immediately after the war when you have the Washington Treaty and massive cuts, because he's very able to fight that battle. But he's one of these people who's, and I'm sure you probably found looking through history for land warfare as well, he's one of those leaders who's an excellent leader to have behind the lines, organizing your logistics, keeping the politicians away from your budgets, and making sure that everybody's supplied and equipped properly. But he is about as useless as a chocolate teapot when it comes to actually leading people into battle. So, yeah.
As I say, it just astonishes me. It's the bit of the battle that goes wrong. I mean, he's the guy that stands, on, is it lion or tiger? He's on one
lion,
of those.
yeah.
Lion. He's standing as his ships are just detonating around him. There's something wrong with our bloody ships today. There's something wrong with our bloody system. It's like, yes, mate, your system, where you told them to increase the rates of fire by leaving the flash doors open, it's like literally your fault.
There's all sorts of things because they're not sure what's going on, and there is I wouldn't say necessarily a cover up, but there's definitely a kind of keep this internal so that our enemies don't get hold of it kind of thing going on. So you get testimony from various officers saying, yes, the state of gunnery safety was appalling. People talking about charges and shells being left lying around in the shell rooms and in the gun working chambers and even in the turrets. For example, it's very difficult to find anything that definitively states we left the flash doors open or we removed the flash doors.
But we know that there are instructions to put them back on, though.
Exactly, that's the thing. Would you send an order through the fleet that says put all these things back on if you know that unless you know that people have been taking them off, and all sorts of little things like that. And I mean, to be honest, it's even things that you can partly blame them for in terms of neglect and not looking for, but on the other hand, it's also partly new technology, because technology is advancing so quickly. Because one of the main problems, should I say, primary suspects as to depending on who you listen to, either was the direct cause or contributed to the destruction of the ship's fire magazine detonation, is the cordite itself. And the cordite is stabilized because obviously otherwise it degrades. It's an explosive. But what the British don't realize, because cordite's a fairly new propellant, is that over time the chemicals that are being used to stabilize the cordite mix with the cordite, and then they exude through the silk bags that hold the cordite, and you get crystals of pure nitrocellulose and nitroglycerin, which then fall off.
The asbestos fibers problem is that it's fine when it goes in, but over time it's kind of all around you.
Yeah, or if you imagine if you've got like a beaker of salt water, or if you live in a hard water area, just a glass of water, if you leave it to evaporate, you get these crystal deposits left on your glass. And it's kind of that. It sweats when it gets warm and as it degrades, and then you get these crystals of very sensitive, explosive, very fine, almost dust-like. Yeah. And as the charges are then passed through the entire ammunition handling system, they're being disturbed. So you get all this explosive dust is falling off of them and coating everything. And this is where the negligence comes in, because they should be cleaning and sweeping these all the time. But because they think, nitrocellulose and cordite is so much more stable, so much therefore safer than gunpowder was, the old regulations when they used to use black powder charges, which involved scrubbing everything to within an inch of its life every so often to make sure there wasn't highly explosive dust lying around, they don't follow those because they don't think they need to. And so everything's got this fine coating of cordite dust. And it gets to a point where on one of the ships, one of the gunners comes in and goes, "This is awful." And everyone's like, "Yeah, there's dust everywhere, but so what? Doesn't matter. It's fine." And he actually gets a pan and brushes up some of the dust that's on the magazine floor, takes it up onto the deck of the ship, lays it out in a little trail, and all the officers are watching. Oh, what's this crazy guy from below deck's doing? He takes a match, puts it to one end of the trail of dust, and it just goes, because it's a combination of various explosives. And then he forces everybody to actually clean out the magazines. But on other ships that don't have someone like that, one of the theories of either contributory or possibly primary cause is that when a shell hits the turret and goes into the turret, obviously that exerts a lot of shock on the ship, on the metal. So of course, if you've ever had anything solid that's covered in dust, or you've hit a blanket, it all goes everywhere. Yeah. So then the impact of that shell would have made all the explosive dust start up into the air, which makes it even more explosive, because you can even make flour explode if it's sufficiently aerosolized. Yeah. And then, of course, the shell explodes and there's fire everywhere. So now you've basically created a fuel air bomb with actual explosives, and then you get boom. So I think it's definitely a contributory factor. Exactly where it sits on the scale of contributory through to primary cause, I'm still undecided on, but it's definitely an issue.
Yeah. All right, well, we're just about out of time, guys. In fact, we've gone over time, but we started late because we had internet problems. So I'm going to do a couple of reminders. The first is we just hit the 2,500 subscriber milestone. So we are giving away Warlord Game Center's this Band of Brothers starter set. Check out the 2,500 subscriber video. It tells you how to enter. We will be doing the draw next week in the live show. Check that out. As I say, they sent us it as a prize. Where did we get up to? I have successfully got some texture and tone on these from the dry brushing. just ready to get some clump foliage on them. Johnny B, where did you get up to with your hobbying?
Get rid of BE. There we go. I've got the base colours down on this dwarf, so that's cool. And that's it. That's all I did. I was quite intrigued by that topic. And Mr. Callum, sir?
I'm just thinking that I could just sat here for another hour, to be honest with you. Listening to that.
It was going quite smoothly.
Yeah. I've done the blue and started the white on these guys. So
Nice.
If I'm going to have French models, at least I didn't paint them, right?
Well, I mean, quickly before we move on.
All right, yeah. Oh,
there you go.
Hey.
Is they already done?
Red ones. Need some red ones.
Knee-high boots, mate. That is sweet. That's what I like.
We're going out in the pool.
What about you, Drac? Did you get any hobbying done this evening?
Well, I got the big carrier. The big carrier out of it, managed to get it out of the packaging without disturbing anyone. So this looks quite interesting, actually, because I do like these resin hulls. They're quite nice for the big ships. And
leave it, John. Leave it.
Very simple. But what I've noticed with this one is you can see there you've got the lift at the back of the carrier, and this bit, which is the window fitting for it, it's got a large bomber with folded wings, and it appears if you flip it the other way, you've got a little fighter. So you can have two different things popping up, which is quite fun. I do like that actually about with the new stuff they seems to be very modular. So you get a single sprue, almost like the old Battlefleet Gothic, where you can build multiple different ships off of the same sprue. So I'm having a bit of fun with that.
Guys, it was an interesting one tonight. Leave us some feedback down in the comments if you can. It's really difficult for me to know how easy that was to follow because I know something about the battle, and I've, so for me it was very clear what Drac was talking about and where we were going with that. I don't know without illustrations how easy that was to follow. I enjoyed it a lot, having an expert on to talk about his thing.
I know nothing. Jutland used to be a video shop up in my village. But I
like
now
video
know
cassettes.
Yeah, like Jutland videos. Yeah, man,
Legends.
you'd go up there and rent RoboCop. But I understood what I needed to understand from that. All right, maybe I wasn't as involved, but no, it was quite easy to follow. You kept it pretty detailed enough and layman-like that I could follow it. So I think that was all right. Good.
I mean, if you're interested in maritime naval history, particularly in the age of steam, would you say? I mean, if the word machinery is included somewhere in the ship, then Drachinifel's probably covered it. A combination of 5-minute guides which cover individual warships and their history, and I love that stuff. I'm waiting for a more detailed Cruise of the Emden, by the way. That's what I feel you need.
It's coming. I've got a stack of books about this high, covering various aspects of that, which I need to go through.
I mean, it's a fascinating story. So there's a 5-minute guides. You do more detailed guides about battles and campaigns. So again, you've got a lot of Second World War stuff. And then you now, I don't know whether you started in lockdown or just before, but you now do, is it a weekly live show?
Bi-weekly. Bi-weekly, yeah. So the at the end of the month, because I get sent questions by people on Patreon, so I do two. I do a recorded segment which covers what I call the sort of the strictly naval historical questions, and then I do a live section which I start off by going through all the alternate history, some what ifs kind of stuff, and then I take questions from the chat depending on how much voice I've got left after that, and that's the end of each month. And then in the middle of each month you have a kind of more general one, which is just throw questions into the chat and I'll see how many I can answer. Those are my two live stream segments. But after this is done, if you drop me an address or something, I'll throw in a couple more boxes for the prize 2,500 subscriber prize giveaway.
Oh, mate, That's awesome. The date's only next week. We'll talk about it after the show.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's like having virtual grandpas telling us war stories. That could be good or bad. You know.
I don't know. I like my granddad, so I take that as a compliment.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's listening to my granddad that realizes 500 years my family spent fighting the French on the high seas. Sounded like a lot of fun. We did most of the winning. Why did we stop? Boots on the ground with Dom, interesting Kaiser. Yeah, look, Drachinifel is like an amazing megastar YouTuber, but I'm hoping that it will come back on again. I think definitely. Next time I'll get some pictures ready. I realized there was bits talking about, so you know, like the U-turn. There were definitely moments if I thought about we're going to talk about Jutland to get a few illustrations and a few of the characters to help put them in.
And we can talk a bit more about modeling as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, come on! It's at some point, maybe afterwards, I'll see if I can show you the modeling room. Trust me, wargaming modeling. You know, if I hadn't started a naval history channel, I'd be competing with you for the wargaming channel.
I think you're in a better gig because it's a much bigger market. The history stuff is much.
But
much
I will quite happily talk paints and glues and resin versus plastic and 3D printing and various game systems till the cows come home.
Don't we? Yeah. Well, maybe you get some battle reports in because you probably wouldn't want to do that on your channel.
Yeah, we can do. Yeah, I mean, now that you know we're not confined to quarters, we can actually go and say hello to people.
Yeah, as soon as you can be bothered to rig those Black Sea ships. I did not enjoy trying to rig those ships. Did you rig yours, Jack?
I haven't yet.
Oh, mate, you've got party time coming.
Yeah, well, when you've got about 70 ships to do, you kind of lose the will to live every time you look at the reels of rigging. So
rig them before you put the sails on.
Yeah,
definitely. That doesn't make it easy, but it made it easier. Guys, that was us. Remember, Drachinifel is the YouTube channel where you can find him. Loads of great content there if you love your naval history. And that's all from us. We will have a battle report out on Friday. We've got a product review coming out tomorrow. Drachinifel's been a great guest. Really was a pleasure. All our subscribers, members, and viewers, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.